So I think we'll start now. So good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first in a series of webinars from ClimateCare. And these are designed to really share with you our industry knowledge, insight, and experience of how changing customer attitudes are influencing businesses' approach to sustainability and climate change. Now, before I start, I have a few housekeeping points, and just to remind you that the webinar is being recorded and it will also be made available to you after this morning's session. Please do feel free to share this with your colleagues and anyone who you believe would benefit from it. Our webinar will last around 25 minutes, 20 to 25 minutes, and there is the opportunity to ask questions at the end of James's presentation. So just to remind you that the audience will be placed on mute, but you will be able to submit your questions via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. So that just leaves me to thank you again for giving us your time this morning. We trust you find that the presentation will be informative. And without further ado, I will hand you over to James White, who's our sector expert for green gas.
Thank you very much, Peter, and great to see so many people making the time to attend this webinar to learn a little bit more about climate neutral gas and green gas, and really the actions the sector can take to act on the emissions of gas usage. I hope that whilst we're talking about gas use, that you're all safe and well at home, hopefully warm enough with the gas on. Obviously, appreciate your time more than ever with everything that's going on at present. This presentation will really focus primarily on three areas. The first is on the changing consumer trends that are driving the need for green within the energy sector, particularly so on the gas side. It will look at how you can act on this demand, by changing or employing certain techniques and measures to access that customer appeal through green tariffs. And it will look at some examples of successful programs that we at ClimateCare have worked on within the energy sector. Before I go into that, it's just worth introducing ClimateCare and giving you a little bit more background about us. So we have been in the voluntary carbon market as a sector leader and as an expert for over 20 years now. We've been involved in the formation of that voluntary carbon sector. We have led project development, so putting in place physical emissions reductions initiatives around the world. And we've also led on the development of high impact, large scale corporate programs for governments, leading international NGOs, and leading international corporates as well. Throughout all that work, our focus has been really focused on two aspects, namely delivering emissions reductions and improving lives. And we've done that and quantified that. And as you can see through the metrics on the left-hand side of this slide, we're always looking to do more. At present, we have delivered 35 million tons of carbon emissions reductions, and we've delivered 37 million lives improved. And we're targeting 50 and 50 by 2025 and are well on track to achieve that. Amongst all those things, we've been recognised for that impact that we're trying to deliver. We are the #1 ranked B Corp in the UK, which is the profit for purpose movement started in the United States. And we've also won a number of awards, including the Queen's Award for Sustainable Development 3 times at the last count. A bit about me. Peter obviously kindly introduced me just now, but as he mentioned, I'm ClimateCare's lead for the energy and utilities sector. In my work, over the last 18 months particularly, but before that as well, I've worked with energy sector partners within the Big Six, Challenger and Deep Green suppliers, so have an understanding of the market from different perspectives, and I've contributed to leading energy sector and sustainability publications, including the ED Sustainability Forum and the Energy Manager magazine that you may well be aware of. So that's enough about ClimateCare. Moving on to the meat of this presentation, which is really driven by the need to understand the consumer demand for green products within the UK energy market. And the first thing to see and consider here is that customer demand for those green credentials is sharply increasing and is something we anticipate increasing going forwards. And this is reflected both in the B2C market sector, so those working directly with residential customers, but also on the B2B side. Research by Unilever suggests that up to 33% of people are buying from brands or choosing products that they feel represent environmental or social good or are delivering on sustainability. This breaks down nicely, as per the pictogram on the right of the slide, into really two main camps. The first are deep green customers, which represent about 5% of the market. These are customers who are motivated almost solely by green. They are people who will put green credentials of the products and services they buy above things such as price. The remainder of that 33% are what we call light green, and they are influenced by green, but also by price, by customer service, by a whole range of other factors too. The key thing here is that this market sector within the residential side is growing strongly. We've seen publications recently and lots of market research which suggests that this figure is now nearing 80% as opposed to 33 as where it was 12 months ago. And this is a trend we can anticipate continuing to develop and increase, particularly driven by people such as Greta Thunberg and Extinction Rebellion. Putting this numerically, this is around 7.6 million domestic customers who are interested and recognize the value of green products and services that their providers give to them. This trend is also recognized on the B2B side. 80% of businesses are now wanting to be more sustainable based on a survey of 100 UK CEOs. In addition, 84% of those companies feel that their consumers want them to act on climate change and to take action now. Putting this in numerical terms again, this is around 720 business MPANs, or meter points, effectively the number of business opportunities there are for retailers to provide customers with a leading green offering. So the imperative is clear. There's a consumer demand, and it's vital for retailers and other people within the energy industry to be acting on this demand. And there you can see the nice 84% of people on the business side. So in terms of the next steps or the actions available for people or retailers to act on this green demand, really historically that has been focused on green electricity. Those within the energy sector will be aware, of course, that this is something that has been regularly used for the last 10 years or so particularly, and through a variety of mechanisms, either through direct procurement of that electricity through PPAs or through certificate-based mechanisms. What we are seeing now is that many suppliers are beginning to offer renewable electricity as standard. We've seen Shell Energy do so within the last 12 months. Equally, we've seen E.ON move to do the same thing. As a result, there is now a limited opportunity to differentiate on your green credentials as a supplier by focusing purely on your electricity, which has led many new suppliers, namely challenger brands such as Bulb and Octopus, but also big six suppliers such as British Gas, to explore how they can best develop the sustainability credentials of their gas offering. And really, there are three ways that retailers can respond to that demand for green in relation to their own gas supply that they are giving to customers. The first is to reduce the emissions of that gas, either through reflecting on the infrastructure that they are developing in relation to pipelines or efficiency of production, or through influencing customer behavior. The barriers to that in terms of making a statement around that is that it's a longer term process. As with all decarbonisation, it will take more time. And then of course, it's something that should be being done, but it's not necessarily something that can be a transformative impact right now. The other two options, and this is obviously a simplification, of course, but it puts in a nice way the two main avenues that people can explore, are supporting the development of UK biomethane, or what we call UK green gas, or to mitigate your impact through climate neutral gas. And it's these latter two areas that we'll focus on primarily within the body of this webinar. So beginning with biomethane, or with green gas produced in the UK, the first thing to understand is what is this? Putting it very simply, green gas is made through the anaerobic digestion of renewable waste sources, things such as food or farm waste, or in some cases sewage or effluent. It's the process of the anaerobic digestion of that particular renewable source. What happens to it is that it's put into an anaerobic digester. That organic material then breaks down, producing that biomethane or biogas. It's then upgraded to pipeline quality through the addition of propane to increase its calorific value, through the removal of water vapor, and through the addition of odorant for quality and for safety reasons, of course. And then it is injected into the natural gas network. There's two main reasons why biomethane is a strong candidate for the future of the UK gas sector. One is that it's carbon neutral. So all of the biomass that has been utilized in the production of that biomethane has absorbed carbon dioxide in its production, and therefore the gas is certifiably carbon neutral. The other side of it is that there is a number of certified and monitored regulatory systems in place to monitor provision of that green gas to the network, namely the Green Gas Certification Scheme and the Biomethane Certification Schemes in the UK. These two systems use a certificate-based mechanism, which we can go into more detail if you wish, but effectively, this is where you have a unit of green gas produced, so a kilowatt hour, and you allocate a certificate to that, which enables you to track that kilowatt hour through the system, to know its provenance and to know where it is going to in relation to a particular retailer or supplier. So whilst this is obviously a great step and is something that should be pushed and challenged and moved forward within the UK, there are a number of challenges for retailers who are looking to implement this within their customer-facing offerings. These follow somewhat sequentially on from one another, beginning really with the infrastructure challenges that green gas is experiencing at present. Whilst there have been significant successes, we've seen, a huge increase in the amount of green gas that is being supplied within the UK, as you can see here. There are still many challenges available. We've seen 50 new applications for green gas power stations coming online, in the last year or so. We've seen 400 million being put into the development of green gas infrastructure within the UK by 4 of the UK's main gas network providers. However, despite all of those successes, despite the fact that green gas is now supplying 1 million UK homes, as of last year, biomethane still only accounts for 4% of the UK's total gas market's demand. So there's a significant shortfall, which we neither have the ability to tackle right now. And if we do and put time into that, it's going to take a little bit of a delay in regards to catching up with that customer demand. The second part, which is a follow-on impact from that, is supply. So obviously, as we've talked about there's a limited availability of biomethane in general. What biomethane there is relatively concentrated amongst a few retailers. There are those who can directly influence the supply of biomethane, so namely those within the big 6 who are working on this directly, or those who are more premium greens providers who are looking at developing power purchase agreements directly with biomethane producers. But in reality, the rest of the market who perhaps operate as resellers or maybe don't have those direct relationships have limited capacity to develop biogas themselves, and as a result are subject to its availability either on the grid or through those certificate-based mechanisms that I mentioned earlier. As a result, the supply has been concentrated in just a handful of suppliers. To give you an anecdotal example of our work that we've seen, one supplier out there that previously bought 10% of the UK's gas market, biogas market rather, or biogas supply, is actually anticipating buying up to 40% of that in the coming years. So it's something that we can see clearly constricting and being focused on just a few independent retailers. So that constriction of supply, driven by infrastructure and concentration in just a few retailers, is something that we are going to see leading to cost constraints in the future that we've already seen driving costs up. To give you an idea of the cost of renewable gas, of biogas, that's increased threefold over the last 18 months, driven largely by factors as we've seen and discussed just now. And this is something we anticipate continuing as demand continues to grow faster than supply of biogas can respond. So how does this impact the way in which suppliers or retailers can act? We are still in the same position of being able to and having a responsibility to reduce our emissions. And that means working in whatever capacity we can to influence our customers, to influence the people that we work with, to ensure that they understand the need to reduce their gas usage, but also to explore the ways in which the grid can reduce gas and where we can be more efficient. We should also support UK biomethane because it's clear that this is a really valuable renewable source that we should be developing, but it is the case that not all retailers will be able to support that equally or to be involved in that to a commensurate degree. The remaining option is to mitigate your impact through climate neutral gas, and this is the point that will form the latter part of this webinar today. So, in short, being climate neutral, buying climate neutral gas is done through carbon offsets or through carbon offsetting. Put simply, this means that when an energy retailer is looking to provide customers with verifiable climate neutral gas, they do it through offsetting the carbon emissions of that gas through emission reductions projects in the developing world. What this requires them to do is to measure the emissions that occur from that natural gas, and then to identify high impact emission reductions projects and to finance a commensurate emission reduction equal to their own natural gas footprint through that. And there's a nice diagram there which sets exactly how that works and kind of references the nature of the finance that is involved. Carbon offsetting is done under very intense and rigorously assessed standards that are recognized internationally. This ensures that the climate and social benefits of the projects that you are supporting are verified, they are tangible, and that they are permanent and additional. We undertake a whole variety of different areas of assurance on the project's quality that we work with on our side. So that ensures, in part that we are working to the industry recognized best practice standards, namely the gold standard and the verified carbon standard, or VERA, as you can see there. Both of those standards were developed by the UN and really represent best practice within the sector. We also undertake a full audit of the carbon accounting, so the carbon measurement that each project undertakes, as well as a wider review of the entities involved in that project to ensure that they are operating in a best practice manner. There are four main reasons that climate neutral gas through this mechanism provides a really strong and rigorous way to act for retailers right now. The first part is that it's relatively cost effective, which assuages some of those concerns that retailers may have around the current UK biogas situation. There is a huge variety of different projects out there at a variety of different cost points, some of which are operating very cost effectively, either due to their scale or due to the type of technology that they are utilizing to cut emissions. So in lots of ways, they provide a very cost effective mechanism to tackle that emissions of the natural gas supply. The second part is that there is sufficient supply to meet that industry demand, which addresses the challenge we're experiencing within the UK in relation to biomethane. And this is evidenced by the vast number of different industries that are currently using carbon offsets to mitigate their own emissions. These include leading manufacturers such as Jaguar Land Rover, a whole variety of other financial services institutions such as Aviva and the World Bank, alongside other private and professional institutions and services such as Linklaters, Virgin Atlantic, WWF. So there is sufficient demand to meet the UK's gas supply and to mitigate those emissions right now. The third part of this is that, as we've alluded to previously, carbon offsets are robust and effective. This is assured by the standards that you're working to and the rigor to which they assess the projects, and also evidenced by the type of organisation who are looking to partner with them. Offsetting is used by government agencies, people such as the Swiss Energy Agency, well-renowned international organisations such as the World Bank, and as such has the backing of those institutions and their own due diligence procedures to provide an additional level of assurance on its quality. And the last reason is that it's engaging. As I've alluded to, there are a huge variety of different carbon offsetting projects. These include things such as rainforest protection, so looking at wider land use practices, planting of trees, reforestation of degraded areas, protecting existing endemic rainforest in many parts of the world. These are hugely appealing to consumers because they are well known, people understand and can associate and empathize with rainforest, and they're delivering a huge myriad of different benefits, both for local communities, but also biodiversity amongst a host of other factors. The second type of project you can support are household level initiatives, and these again are hugely varied, and this is a big category of projects that we work with. These include things such as household biogas, clean cook stoves, which are fuel efficient stoves, and household solar, amongst a host of other different project types. These are really impactful for consumers because they are relating directly to households and are affecting communities on a very individualized level, which means that it's very easy to create a parallel between, for example, a domestic home, where you're talking to customers in that context, with these particular types of projects. The last part, which feeds into the wider need to decarbonize at scale and to tackle carbon emissions in that way is the focus on grid scale renewables. And this is something that you can facilitate. These projects tend to be relatively cost effective, so provide a good option if you are sensitive in that respect, but they're also a key part in tackling the climate change challenge as we see it today. So all of these different project types, when used together, can be adapted to the particular messages that you want to be talking to consumers about, to engage them and to bring them on board with your particular offering. As a result of this diversity, you can develop a unique tariff which is aligned to those customers' interests. So this can be focusing on particular project types, things such as household biogas, other projects such as rainforests, as I've mentioned, but also looking at the combination of supporting international action in the developing world and UK action closer to home. So there's a huge potential to adapt your offerings and what you are looking to deliver based on what you feel customers would be most interested in. In terms of how this is done, I've alluded to this already. It's a simple case of calculating the emission reductions you would require based on your customer forecast for the next year, then developing a unique portfolio based on your key criteria in relation to cost, project location, technology, impact, a whole myriad of other things, and our insight as ClimateCare in relation to what projects are out there. Once that's decided, you can work to monitor your customer gas usage on a continuous basis and work with our communications team to launch and communicate those new tariffs to your customers and to staff, should you choose to. What we wanted to finish on, as we appreciate this has all been quite abstract and it's a little bit of a whistle-stop tour, is just an example of a couple of programs who we are working with at present, who represent some of the different ways that people in the sector have approached this. So the first, I'm sure you will all be familiar with, is British Gas. So they are the largest supplier within the UK in terms of the number of households that they serve, and they are looking at this in a very serious sense. What they are currently doing is running an offering which integrates UK RGGOs, so that's UK-based biomethane through certificates, international offsetting, so looking at emission reduction projects around the world, and UK woodland through an innovative fund which links directly to their brand and to their values, with the result being that the tariff is seen as one of their core customer-facing tariffs going forward, in part due to those trends around consumer demand that we referenced right at the beginning of this webinar. At the other end of the spectrum, obviously aside from outside the basic, is Good Energy. So Good Energy are one of the premium green energy suppliers within the UK, who are actively facilitating the biogas provision within the UK by working directly with them. What Good Energy saw was that there is a huge challenge in actually delivering biogas at scale within the industry, and it's limited in terms of what they can do right now. But as part of a best practice plan, they wanted to make sure they were mitigating any residual emissions that incurred during the use of their gas product. So through international offsetting, they saw a means to do that, and they wanted to make sure that that was tailored to what they were trying to deliver as a company. And as a result, they focused exclusively on biogas carbon offset projects, which are in the developing world, which operates in parallel and is an indicator of the wider impact and the wider transformative change that Good Energy wants to deliver both at home and abroad. So I hope that's given everyone a good idea of the potential solutions that are available to different entities within the utilities market when it comes to tackling the emissions of their gas supply. I hope that was clear. And of course, as my colleague Peter mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions, do feel free to pop them through on the messaging function at the top of the screen, as you can see it. Thank you very much for your attention. It's been great to speak to you all, and I look forward to answering your questions in just a moment.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I can see we've already had a few questions which have come in. If you've had time to draw breath, then obviously we can dive straight into the first question.
That's great.
Yeah, and the first question asks, have there been any commercial outcomes of your carbon offset gas programs?
Yes, there have, and thank you to whoever fielded that question. So these, as we've talked about, these programs are based on a consumer demand, and as a result, there are important different areas in which they can be, seen as a commercial proposition. One way is in, acquiring or retaining new customers and creating demand in that sense. So as we've talked about, there's a market demand for that, and with work with one of our partners, unfortunately, I can't name who, we saw a huge impact in that respect. So they had an anticipated uptake of this new tariff, which was based on this carbon offset mechanism. They actually saw that 6 months into the launch of that new tariff that they had actually exceeded the forecast demand by twofold. So they had double the amount of new customers joining them on that tariff than they had anticipated. So it's a huge differentiator and a huge source of appeal to customers in that respect. The other way in which it can appeal is, based on the alignment to the brand of the entity in question. So in the case of Good Energy, their approach to carbon offsetting was less focused on that. It was more about them doing the right thing in relation to what their values were as a retailer themselves. So there's kind of a twofold benefit there. There's a direct commercial benefit in relation to customer acquisition and retention, but there's also a more indirect benefit in the sense of building your brand and building your presence within the space.
Thank you. Right, so next question, and a very topical one actually. Is there a risk of carbon offsetting discouraging long-term decarbonisation?
Fantastic question. And in our opinion at ClimateCare, no, there is not. And it's really about how offsetting is utilised as part of a wider decarbonisation plan. If you look at the best practice in terms of tackling emissions as set out by the UN, they very clearly point to 3 areas. One is measuring and understanding your emissions. The other is reducing them and taking every action that you can to reduce them. And the last is to mitigate any residual emissions that still occur whilst you're undertaking those reductions processes. So there's very clearly defined, in terms of best practice, a role for offsetting in longer term decarbonisation plans. The other argument that sometimes is made around this is that, people just offset their emissions and maybe don't take action to reduce. This is not something that we have seen as the case. And in fact, if you look at research by sustainability bodies, people such as ED and a number of other entities as well, you can actually see that those companies which carbon offset also have the most developed carbon management and carbon reduction strategies, because they are the most engaged in tackling climate change in any way possible and any way available to them. So really, it's about, I think, the utilization and how you position the offset within your wider strategy. As we've said throughout this presentation, it's one piece of the puzzle. There is other areas to consider. There's longer term reduction. There's customer education, so encouraging them to use less. There's supporting UK biogas where you can, and then mitigating any residual emissions as and when is needed.
Excellent, thank you. Comprehensive answer. And I think the next question really follows on from that. It's asking, is offsetting truly a reliable mechanism?
It is indeed. Where we are now is that carbon offsetting is a very mature tool for tackling climate change. In terms of how these projects are assessed, it's a hugely rigorous process. Before you can even claim any emission reductions from those projects, there has to be a whole process of project design, of project monitoring, of project validation, and project verification. And this process can take anywhere between 5 to 7 years for some projects. In the case of rainforest projects, it can take even longer. And the reason being is that for every one of those steps I just described, the project is assessed by 2 independent third parties and by the standard itself. So there's the gold standard Verra, they do their own assessment. There are other independent entities that come in and do an audit on those assessments. So really the quality is there in relation to the carbon accounting that you are undertaking with these projects. On top of that, at ClimateCare, we appreciate people may want more assurance in that respect. So we undertake our own market leading due diligence procedure as well, which gives you that additional assurance on that carbon accounting side, but also provides additional assurance on the entities involved in that project and that they are acting with the utmost integrity.
Great, thank you. And I think probably the final question for now, but obviously please keep your questions coming through. But final question asks, how do you ensure differentiated products in a highly competitive industry?
It's a really, really good question. As we talked about right at the beginning, and it's great that someone's picked up on this, there is a huge need and a huge competitive pressure within the energy industry, which means that differentiation is, of course, something that everyone wants to be thinking about. In terms of how we approach it at ClimateCare, really it is very much basing any program that the individual retailer or entity wants to develop on their key values and their key outcomes that are desired for that particular project. So we undertake a very partnership centric approach. We sit down, we have a consultation with those entities, we talk to them, we get an understanding of where they see this proposition fitting within their wider range of tariffs. We get understanding of what impacts they would want it to deliver, and then we go away and look at the projects that we work with across the world on a very bespoke basis. And what this means is that really every single tariff that we create is very much tailored to that particular entity's unique requirements, because all entities are different and they will have different ways of wanting to develop a particular product. So it's in part through that on that side, so being very much centered on the retailer's preference and approach. The other side of it is that we understand the projects in a very great degree of detail. So as I mentioned right at the beginning, ClimateCare is a project developer. We also are the exclusive partner of a number of different projects around the world. And as a result, of that underground experience and that direct line of communication to them, we really can understand their impacts in a very deep and meaningful sense, meaning we can bring not just the macro level insights, but the micro level insights to those retailers to really make sure we thread the needle on their particular program.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And I think on that note, we will draw this session to a close. Thank you, James. And once again, thank you for all of those joining our webinar. We trust you found the last 20-25 minutes very interesting. For those of you questions, for those of you who still have questions to ask, James will be obviously on hand to answer any further questions. And please feel free to email them through to james.white@climatecare.org. Also, please, find us on LinkedIn, find and follow both James and ClimateCare on LinkedIn. Now, as mentioned at the start of the seminar, this is the first in a series of webinars from ClimateCare. With our next webinar on the 12th of May at 11 a.m. The webinar is designed, the next webinar is designed to provide an overview about around verified carbon offsetting. It's the same period of time, 20 to 25 minutes with questions afterwards, so very much the same format. And for more information will be made available to you at the end of this session. So you will receive a recording of this webinar, and further invitations to other webinars will obviously be available to you, and please feel free to extend those invitations to your colleagues. So I think that just leaves me to once again thank you all for your time today. We hope to see you soon on our next and following webinars. And in the meantime, please stay safe.